Words have weight, right? But rarely does a single word carry the social, cultural, and geopolitical gravity of the one we're unpacking today. We hear it on the nightly news, we read it in heated political debates, and we literally see its effects in communities all around the world. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to deconstruct the anatomy of a word that sits right at the fault line of modern global discourse: Islamophobia. So you really have to wonder, how exactly did a century-old French academic term leap from the pages of obscure colonial studies to become the absolute center of a modern global debate? To actually understand the policies, the controversies, and the huge societal shifts we're seeing today, we have to strip away the noise and look directly at the source material. We need to map out how this concept evolved, how it shows up in hard data, and why defining it has become such a fierce battleground. Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, Tracing the Evolution. The journey of this term is actually super surprising. You know, the history of this word didn't actually start in the wake of 21st century conflicts like you might assume. Its roots go all the way back to the early 20th century in French literature as Islamophobia. In 1910, it popped up in a thesis by a French colonial bureaucrat named Alain Quelian, who used it to describe a widespread prejudice against Islam in Western civilization. By 1918, it was famously used by the painter Alphonse Etienne Dinet and Algerian intellectual Slimane Ben Ibrahim in a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, basically criticizing pseudoscientific crusades against the religion. And the very first recorded English use? That was in 1923 in the Journal of Theological Studies. But then, the word just kind of sat dormant for decades. It really wasn't until 1997, with a massive landmark report by the UK-based Runnymede Trust, that the term absolutely exploded into modern policy and institutional use. So the crucial point is how that 1997 Runnymede report actually defined the concept for our modern era. They officially described Islamophobia as an outlook or worldview involving an unfounded dread and dislike of Muslims, which ultimately leads to practices of exclusion and discrimination. The authors of that report argued that anti-Muslim prejudice had grown so incredibly fast by the late 1990s that society desperately needed a brand new item in the vocabulary just to identify and address it.
Which brings us to Section 2, Media and Public Opinion. Once we actually have a definition, we have to look at the concrete symptoms of this in society.
Think about the headlines you just scrolled past on your phone every single day. A study by researchers at the universities of Georgia and Alabama looked at U.S. news reports of terrorist attacks between 2005 and 2015. And this brilliantly illustrates the media framing. They found that attacks committed by Muslim extremists received a staggering 357% more media coverage than attacks by non-Muslims. To really put that into perspective for you, attacks by non-Muslims received an average of 15 headlines, while those by Muslim extremists generated an average of 105 headlines. And this is despite data showing that far-right extremists were responsible for almost double the number of terrorist acts in the US attributed to Muslim individuals during a very similar time frame. Now, that kind of media environment, combined with massive geopolitical events, has a really stark, measurable impact on societal behavior. If you look at FBI hate crime data, before 2001, anti-Islamic hate crimes in the US averaged about 31 per year, with arson offenses at less than 1. But in 2001, following the September 11 attacks, total offenses just skyrocketed to 546, including 18 arson offenses. And while those numbers did subside after that initial massive spike, the post-2001 average leveled out at 159 incidents per year. That is a huge, sustained increase compared to the pre-2001 baseline. Now, what's really interesting about this next point is the deep psychological toll this takes beyond physical crimes. A 2018 poll by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding uncovered a phenomenon called internalized Islamophobia. When asked if they felt most people want them to feel shame for their faith identity, 30% of Muslim Americans agreed. That was a significantly higher percentage than any other faith group surveyed. It really shows how continuous external pressures and negative stereotyping can eventually seep inward, deeply affecting how a community views its very own identity. Moving on to Section 3, Secularism and Societal Trends. Let's look at the philosophical and political tensions pulling at this term.
Over in Europe, this debate takes on a very specific flavor. We're looking at a huge collision between long-standing traditions of secularism, modern debates over multiculturalism, and really intense arguments over migration. Take France, for example. They have a deep-rooted tradition of laïcité, which is a strict form of secularism in the public sphere. Some critics there argue that Muslim immigration is inherently incompatible with this secular Western society. And sociologists note that in this kind of environment, Islamophobia can essentially act as a rejection of multiculturalism itself, blending so tightly with xenophobia that they become incredibly difficult to tell apart.
And this collision maps out to massive real-world scale and political friction, though it varies wildly depending on which border you cross. Check out this 2017 Chatham House poll. They asked the public across 10 European countries if all further migration from mainly Muslim countries should be stopped. On average, 55% agreed. But look at these stark geographic differences. In Poland, a massive 71% agreed. In France, it was 61%. But then, over in the UK, only 18% expressed that view. It's fascinating because it shows exactly how local histories and political rhetoric uniquely shape public anxieties.
All right, Section 4, Racism versus Religious Criticism. This is arguably the fiercest academic and legal battleground we're covering today. When the Runnymede Trust originally formalized the term, they were super careful to try and draw a very clear line between actual bigotry and legitimate debate. They created this framework contrasting closed and open views of Islam. So closed views, which they equated with Islamophobia, see the religion as this static, monolithic block. It's viewed as inferior, barbaric, and inherently violent. But on the flip side, open views are founded on a baseline respect for the religion, but absolutely permit legitimate disagreement, dialogue, and critique. However, critics of the term strongly argue that this distinction is completely lost in practice, causing a lot of conceptual ambiguity. Impartially speaking, we see pushback from across the political spectrum. Just take a look at this quote from French philosopher Pascal Bruckner, who called the term a clever invention because it amounts to making Islam a subject that one cannot touch without being accused of racism. These critics argue that the word is frequently weaponized to completely stifle entirely legitimate constructive criticism of religious doctrine or practices.
Let's move to and see how this builds into two deeply entrenched camps. On one side, sociologists and scholars strongly argue that Islamophobia functions exactly like anti-Muslim racism. The idea is that because Muslims are often stereotyped as a single homogeneous racial group, the discrimination they face parallels traditional racial bigotry. On the other side, advocates for free speech, including prominent political figures like UK Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, warn that legally defining and policing Islamophobia seriously risks introducing anti-blasphemy laws through the back door. They worry this effectively shields a set of ideas from necessary, open public scrutiny.
Finally, Section 5, Global Efforts Against Discrimination. Let's look at how institutions worldwide are actively navigating all this complexity.
At the structural level, we're seeing coordinated strategies, like the European Union's Counter-Islamophobia Toolkit that launched back in 2018. This toolkit lays out a really highly structured four-step approach for policymakers. Step 1, define the misinformed, dominant narratives circulating in society. Step 2, thoroughly document them in the media and public life. Step 3, deconstruct these ideas to expose their logical flaws. And finally, Step 4, reconstruct mainstream ideas so they accurately reflect the diverse, everyday realities of Muslim citizens. It's essentially a systemic approach trying to solve a systemic issue.
And taking it right up to the highest international stage, we've seen some truly historic diplomatic action. In March 2022, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a consensus resolution which was introduced by Pakistan on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. This resolution officially proclaimed March 15th as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. It really marks a huge moment of global institutional recognition, signaling an international commitment to addressing this specific form of religious and cultural bigotry. As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. Can global societies successfully protect vulnerable minorities from hate while fiercely guarding the fundamental right to free expression? We've seen today how a century-old academic term evolved into an absolute lightning rod for modern anxieties about migration, secularism, media representation, and civil rights. The way we choose to balance the protection of marginalized communities with the uncompromising protection of open debate, well, that's going to define the social cohesion of our societies for decades to come. Thank you so much for learning with me today.